Well, today I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Jenkins for our podcast. Andrew is the founder of Volterra and is going to really be speaking to us around the importance of social media strategy. Welcome, Andrew.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome. And I guess first question really right now is we've come through the pandemic is what sort of challenges are organizations facing when it comes to marketing their organizations or their companies?
Well, a lot of organizations that have been relying on, I'll say, more traditional or more options in their marketing efforts are feeling really constrained. Um, and so if you did conferences or event marketing, or just the mere fact of sending your representatives on a sales call, not happening in the same way. So we're seeing more and more organizations having to double down on digital or start digital where they weren't before because they haven't, in many ways, no other choice. And so they're having, you've seen stats going around about companies' digital transformation happening in weeks rather than months or years like they had originally thought. And for some, it's not just a necessity, but perhaps it's going to serve them well in the long run. But most definitely, it's this forced change in their approach. But what's weighing in their favor is the fact that many of the people that they're targeting are spending more and more time online. So much of their digital efforts is being received by a welcoming audience. So.
And there are any specific sectors that have been harder hit, would you say, or are you seeing any trends on sectors that are having to accelerate into digitalization more than others?
Well, I mean, I've seen the conferences just decimated, so they've had to go virtual. I recently, but some of them, having done that, have done a fantastic job. I was recently on a summit hosted by American Express, and they did a virtual summit, and you had different, essentially as if you were at a conference venue, you had different rooms that you could go into for different topics or different streams. And it was really, really well organized. You could watch the recordings later. And so, some have really risen to the challenge of replicating that experience in a virtual world. They even tried to facilitate the networking, which, to be fair, can still be challenging. But no matter the industry, if you were accustomed to going to conferences, well, that's gone by the wayside. I really, really feel for retailers and restaurants who have had to rely much more heavily on social, digital, delivery apps, things like that. And to remind people that they're just down the street, and there's, even though they're local, they're having to be digital with their local endeavors. Just to remind people, like, shop local, do business locally, and so on. Even though the likes of Amazon and others are really enjoying the fruits of this experience, but certainly retailers that were bricks and mortar, to survive, are having to become digital and change things up.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that notion of just amplifying everything about being local. So what tools has someone got? You mentioned retailers, you mentioned the hospitality, restaurants and pubs. So what could they do practically to amplify that message that they're local? What tools have they got at their disposal to do that effectively?
Well, certainly, to rely on reviews, if the likes of Yelp, or make sure that they're set up for Google My Business. If they're an American Express merchant, is there anything that American Express can do to kind of a halo effect? Because American Express has the Small Business Saturday type of events, things like that. Doing geo-targeted advertising, via Facebook or Instagram or both. It does take effort, but pay attention to people tagging your business in their Instagram and things like that. Now, it's not a retailer or a restaurant, but we were working with a hospital and I went on Instagram and we were doing some research, and we found people were tagging the hospital on their Instagram when they were visiting. And I said, like, people are coming here either as a patient to visit a patient or for some reason, but they're going out of their way to tag you. And they're in a way they're kind of they're stating their brand affinity for you. And that mere fact of just that extra step of listening to see who's paying attention to you, as a way to just reach out and, like, if I ordered food from you and I tagged you on Instagram because I went home and I took a picture of my food, as some people do on Instagram, and you acknowledge it and say, I hope it was a good meal or whatever, um, to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Because one of the, it was a very interesting thing. I teach social media strategy here at the University of Toronto. And a few years ago, one of my students who had just moved to Toronto from another part of Canada talked about how she needed to get her hair cut. And there's another example of a business hard hit by the pandemic. Anyway, this was pre-pandemic, but she came to Toronto and she said, I need to get my hair cut. So I went on Instagram and I looked up hashtag hair salon, hashtag Toronto. And she found 3 or 4 salons. She looked at the pictures that the salons had taken of their customers. She looked at the comments from those customers and others, and she sent them a DM, a private message. And she picked one, sent a DM, and booked an appointment. And I said to her, so, like, Google didn't come up in that at all? She said, no. So the people are using social media in an innovative way to, in some ways, as a utility. And people are booking travel, not literally booking, they'll go to Expedia or whatever, but they're going on Instagram and they're looking up hashtags related to the places they want to go. And they're seeing pictures taken by people who've already been there. And they're sending them direct messages saying, did you enjoy it? Where did you stay? Was it worth it? What should I avoid, etc. And so they're actually planning their itinerary by reaching out to fellow users. And so if businesses can insert themselves into some of those conversations in an appropriate way, not intrusive, but or make themselves available in a more utilitarian way through social, hopefully that will improve their circumstances even a little.
Yeah, and I think that notion that you talk about in terms of geotargeting is critical. It hadn't really struck me before, but that's probably more important than ever. So for the uninitiated amongst us, what exactly is geotargeting? And if I was thinking about my Instagram or Facebook, or LinkedIn, what are some practical things I could do just to be much more effective in that area?
So I'll give you a perfect example. A few years ago, there was a house for sale across the street from my house. And the real estate agent who had that listing was pushing ads for that house on Facebook to people in a certain region around the postal code for that house. And it appeared in my Facebook feed.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect example of how geotargeting, not just the geographic location, but you can also have interests and things like that, depending on the criteria that Facebook, Facebook in this case, makes available to you. When there were conferences that were, in the real world, you could target hashtags. You could target that location of that convention center to geo-target people that during that period of the conference would be showing up in their feeds.
Yeah.
So, like, you can do that kind of stuff. You can get into specific interests, or there's an expression called similar audience. So a local merchant, if they have a email distribution list, if they're trying to get beyond that audience, you can upload that email list to Facebook, and you can use the same criteria to run a campaign on Instagram as well. Upload the email list, run a lookalike audience process so that any of the emails on your list that have been used as logins for Facebook, Facebook then tells you, well, if this is the profiles of your audience on Facebook, here's a lookalike audience. So now I can target my existing audience, but I can now also target essentially a mirror and go larger. And so there's an element of geographic targeting there, because if you're a local business, this the assumption is that your customer base is local as well. And again, with the local audience, it would be local too. And you can, not only go lookalike audience, but you can also geographic target in addition to it. And so those are just some very tactical advances, examples that can be applied. But it still comes down to, even if I'm targeting the right audience, I have to have the right offer.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's
to
a
be
great.
certain of that too.
Yeah, and how easy is it just to upload your database to Facebook or Instagram? Because I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, just a CSV file. You just narrow it to the email addresses, and once it's uploaded, it's encrypted. So anybody concerned about privacy, and yes, there have been some privacy issues with Facebook. Let's not
Yeah,
ignore that. But we're working with a number of organizations where they're highly regulated. They have to deal with compliance. They're in financial services, but the language, the legalese from the Facebook website as it pertains to emails have been addressed. And I've been working directly with Facebook on that to appease the various stakeholders that we work with. And I'm here in Canada. We have a thing called the Castle Compliance, which is the Canadian anti-spam legislation. In Europe, you have GDPR, which is even more stringent. So um, if we make sure that we're GDPR compliant, we're kind of like covered in a variety of ways, even for Canada as well.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's the other point I just wanted to tease out is this notion of reviews, because I sense right now that it's critical, certainly if we don't know about business and stuff like that, that we are never had it easier to go and do some research on a company, or where we're going to go and stay in a hotel, or look at a restaurant review, or indeed whether we're going to do business with a company, we look on Glassdoor. So Trustpilot and Glassdoor and all these other things, you previously wouldn't really think this is an integral part of the marketing mix, but I sense from what you're saying, it's such an important area to pay attention to and to get right.
Well, I would say you have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, because unfortunately, if someone wants to cancel you and they can mobilize a group of people to give you a negative review, even though they've never done business with you,
Yeah,
or a former employee who has an axe to grind puts a review on Glassdoor that is completely unfounded and is more opinion than fact, unfortunately, you've been painted with a broad brush.
yeah,
And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, you may have recalled this getting into the media, where a dentist from the United States went over to Africa and paid an exorbitant amount of money, and some folks dragged a lion out of a protected area so that he could shoot it. And this lion was so well known, it had a name, Cecil.
yeah.
Anyway, the word got out that this dentist from the US had killed Cecil the lion. And people went to the Yelp page for his dental practice, from all over the world. They're not patients. They're not, and I'm not defending his actions as a hunter. That's a separate issue. But what I'm getting at is that people went to hit the Yelp page for his dental practice, and they left, if they could leave 0 reviews, they would, but I believe you can only leave 1 star. And they left like 5,000 1-star reviews. Now, he will never recover from that cratering of his reputation on Yelp. And there are some who say Yelp is a bit gamed, and Yelp comes to you and says, well, for a fee, we can improve your rating, etc. So all that to say, I take some of the reviews with a grain of salt. It still comes back to, if you do a good job of serving your customers, you probably don't have much to worry about.
Yeah.
But recognize, if you're doing a good job for your customers, and ask them kindly for a review, those are some great digital breadcrumbs to be to leave online about you. But you've got to make sure that you're treating your customers well, or trying to bring about a remedy, because those digital programs are out there. So if you don't treat them nicely, the old adage, if someone is mistreated, they'll tell two friends and they'll tell two friends and so on. But one of the great things about social that is often overlooked, and I know this is a long-winded answer to your question, if I have a bad experience and I tell you in social I'm having a bad experience, and you come to me and say, oh, we understand, like the first step is make sure that they know that they're heard. So you acknowledge the problem. You're not necessarily claiming responsibility or anything like that, but you're saying, we understand you have an issue. We're prepared to discuss this further with you. And to expedite a solution, please give us a call. And taking the conversation offline. And there's a great phrase I heard from the CMO of the Four Seasons Hotel, the former CMO at the time, who said, when you have an irate customer in the lobby of your hotel, your first priority is to get them out of the lobby. And so move them offline, resolve their problem. And in many instances, that same customer will come back to social where they initiated their complaint and praise you for solving their problem. So yes, you had the negativity of them having a comment on social media about you. But then you get the added byproduct of earned media when they come back and they praise you for solving their problem.
Yeah.
And so it compounds your reputation as someone who goes the extra mile to solve a customer problem.
Yeah, I think it's just definitely that sort of service recovery. If you have a challenge, it's how well you respond. Part of your marketing mix again that will determine whether you've got a good outcome or you're going to have somebody who's maybe going to be really against you. So I really get that, and it's actually a salutary reminder. Just we come on to our next bit about LinkedIn, to go and ask my clients for some LinkedIn recommendations, because it's an easy ask, but it's something that you have to kind of keep reminding yourself to do. So right now, let's think about LinkedIn. It's obviously a really powerful, certainly in the business world, tool. What are the areas that you're seeing that are areas that we should really pay attention to when we are thinking about our LinkedIn presence and our profile and communication?
Well, we're again, because of the pandemic, we're all going through somewhat of our own personal digital transformations. For a long time, LinkedIn was still seen just as this job site. And you've probably experienced this personally as well, that over the last year or so, even pre-pandemic, the rise in its use by certainly salespeople and business development, relationship building, anybody in that capacity, whether they be an entrepreneur or they're a sales representative for an organization. But again, because we can't have a face-to-face sales call, we've got to initiate these relationships digitally. In some cases, and they remain digital throughout. I mean, you and I have not been in the same room together. We've only met in this way, and we just, in some ways, we just have to accept that fact. And so this is part of that, personal digital transformation. But where LinkedIn has 700 plus million members globally, but the percentage of those that are active on a monthly basis and actively sharing content actively is actually quite small. I think the last stat I heard was 3 million plus active members actively on a monthly basis are sharing content. That's a huge delta between 3 million and 700 million. So all that to say, if you are sharing content and you are more active, you are more visible. So if you are one of the leading edge sales reps or business development folks or relationship builders, you are more visible. Now, that also means what I've seen is the rise of automation, to be sending messages in an automated way into people's inbox. And so I'm getting half a dozen a week of automated messages that look like a genuine message to begin, and then I accept their invitation to connect, and then the pitch comes. Sometimes 2 minutes later, sometimes a day or two later. And it got so bad last week, I received a follow-up message after accepting the person's connection, And the second message said, dear, literally in brackets, insert first name. In your work at uh, my company, as insert job title here in parentheses. And I replied back to him saying, you get one chance to make a first impression, and the automation tool that you just used to send this message blew it for you. And so I removed them from my network. I've reported the spam, and I'm getting those on a daily basis. Now, some are saying put an emoji before your first name and your headline, or one person I know is another advocate of LinkedIn has spaced out his name, like a space between every letter of his name, so that he can tell when a bot sends him a message, whether it just picks up the first letter
Yeah.
of his name because of that space. And this is just to showcase how much of this spamming is happening on LinkedIn. And the main thing is that it should be about building relationships. It should be about using proper etiquette. The phrase I hear from others is, if you went to a networking event and just walked up to 10 different people and said, hi, I'm Andrew, would you like to buy my stuff? Like, people would just be repelled. But for some reason, they think that they can, hi, I'd like to get connected. And then the next message is, well, by the way, I have this stuff I want to sell you. And but there was no relationship building after that initial message. There was no offer of assistance, etc.
So it's a really, really sort of makes to me a huge amount of sense. So for someone like myself who is looking to reach out to somebody who might be an important CEO, there's obviously you can do your research, you can do the connect button. What I try to do more often not is a personal message about why I'm reaching out to them, and as if I were just talking to them on the phone. Again, are there some tips or some things that you'd be urging people to do that is more likely that when someone gets it and they don't know me from Adam, they just actually walk to that conversation and feel more likely to connect with me?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, take just 2 to 3 minutes, scan their profile before you're sending a message, see if there's anything in common between you and them. Do you share any mutual connections, mutual interests, work history? Are you alumni of school programs? Similar passions in the charitable space, or other interests. But as well, you can look for organic opportunities too. And I'll give you an example. So I was talking to another connection of mine who shared a great example of, it's Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock, and someone in his network posts on LinkedIn saying it's 5 o'clock on Friday. My wife, and this is on LinkedIn, my wife just turned on Led Zeppelin to celebrate the end of the week. What, if any, music do you play to play in the weekend, or to close off the week? And it started this huge thread of conversation, and whether it was music or not, it resonated with people. It touched them about, it just kind of switched their mind away from, like, we're all stuck on Zoom all week long, endless meetings, endless email, and so on. And it just that little phrase about, like, how do you play the weekend out, or play into the weekend and end your week. And people outside of his networks kind of got pulled into the thread. And he reached out to a few people on Monday and said, isn't it great that we can talk about Led Zeppelin on LinkedIn? It would be great to connect here. And people joined his network as a result of this very human conversation. Now, I'm not suggesting that you start sharing what should be on Facebook on LinkedIn. I'm not suggesting that at all, because I have seen the rise of, I call the Facebookification of LinkedIn. We want to be careful about what's appropriate, what's not. But that being more human, that's kind of just, recognition that people are all feeling a little sort of like housebound, et cetera, because of the pandemic, that with this, just bringing a sliver of cheer to their day, led to growth in his network. And that's just a great organic opportunity. And, don't just look for cold outreach to people. Look at conversations around content that are happening on LinkedIn, and can you join those conversations? And then, can you compliment someone on, legitimately on something they shared, something that they said, and then, reach out to them later, and add them to your network. And because you've already kind of established a connection, a rapport with them, with no other agenda, like you weren't selling them anything. It was just, again, it was organic. It was like you were part of a larger conversation, just like at a networking event.
Yeah. Nice.
And play into those rather than the cold calling. But the other thing to do for outreach, as I said, scan their profiles, look for commonalities. But the other one of those commonalities is mutual connections. And what you may want to do is take an extra step and reach out to the mutual connection, if it's a strong one, and say, would you feel comfortable introducing me? And here's what I'd like to talk to them about. And that, and try to make it less of a sales pitch and more about just a conversation. Or take the burden off of that person and say, would you feel comfortable if I reached out to them directly and said that you encouraged me to reach out?
Yeah.
And so you're actually kind of giving yourself your own warm referral. And it just, all you asked was like all of 30 seconds of your mutual connection to just, give me the blessing to reach out to this person.
No, I like that. I like it a lot. And I think what the last few months has been is an opportunity for us to spring clean, for want of a better word, a lot of our social media collateral, including LinkedIn and Facebook. The things that you kind of, I'll get around to it manana one day, and then suddenly we found an opportunity to do that. Again, and to other some specific areas, the photograph or hashtags we should use, or even our own personal introduction that, again, has a greater sense of building our personal brands or building our sense of being a key person of influence. What would you be calling out there?
Think of your LinkedIn profile as a resource, not a resume. So the way I describe it to my students is it's the most electronically rich business card you could dream of having. So, use it to that degree. So when people go to my LinkedIn profile, they'll see a banner image behind my profile pic of me on stage giving different keynote presentations. Now, speaking is not the only thing that I do, but it is something that I do, and it conveys my thought leadership and my expertise and so on. And I didn't have to tell you. It telegraphs it just by the mere fact of that imagery. And so there's no cost for you to have a banner image behind your profile, but does the banner image, which is the first thing on the landing page of your profile that is seen beside your profile pic, does it convey what you want it to? There's nothing wrong with having your job title in your headline, but you've now got 200 some characters for your headline. So what else can you say? Can you put in a call to action? You are more than one thing. You are more than your job title. Do you have certifications? Have you won awards? Do you have patents to your name? Whatever, look for other people in your industry or like you that might inspire you or that you want to differentiate yourself from. And then as we move down, the other thing is your content information. Can people contact you, or have you put a bit of a wall up? But how much of the content information is current? Sometimes people forget and they still have an email from their old job there, or nothing. Customize the URL for which is within your content information. And then as we move down, we talked about headline. Look at your summary. The first 2.5 lines of your summary. It's kind of like the opening paragraph of a book. Does it make you want to read more? And when you click to see more, what's beneath that? Is it your skills and expertise? Does it invite people to connect with you? Does it talk about how you help? And does it talk about you in the first person rather than the third person? And if you think of all the roles that you've had over your career as chapters in a book, your about section or summary should be kind of stitching all those chapters together. And the last thing I'll leave you with from one is just activity. Carve out time in a week, be it a little bit each day or once a week, whatever you can manage, to be active on the platform and start sharing content. And you don't have to author content. Find an article. Like, for instance, I shared an article about Marissa Mayer, at the time CEO of Yahoo, and it talked about her 130-hour work week. And I just put the word agree question mark ahead of the title of the article. Like, do you agree with this insane work week? And that just sparked a conversation about, some workaholics defended it. Other people said, like, this is insane, no work-life balance, etc. And again, it had nothing to do with my work necessarily. I just wanted to like spark a conversation, and I did. You can share your own content, but and if people are like, well, where do I find content? When you asked about hashtags, what's unique in relation to hashtags like on like Twitter or things like that, LinkedIn ranks hashtags based on followers. So you can set a number of hashtags related to your business based on what you want to be discovered for. And as well, you can find conversations surrounding the hashtags that you're interested in. And so, we're working with a financial services client in the area of impact investing and responsible investing. And it's a subtle thing, but responsible investment, I think, has more followers than responsible investing. So we're tagging our content with the most followed hashtags. It's a very simple tactic, but unless you do a little bit of research on LinkedIn in the search field, you wouldn't know the distinctions. But if you're trying to get your content discovered, it's to start paying attention to that kind of stuff.
Amazing. So how do, I mean, you mentioned that you're a lecturer at university, but how do you help businesses then practically improve the whole of their marketing communications, and specifically in the social media? If someone was interested following this conversation, that we've had today, what are the sort of things that you would be saying, this is how I'd help a company or an entrepreneur be more effective?
Well, somewhat jokingly, I say we tweet so you don't have to. A lot of organizations are doing social media off the corner of their desk. They are doing social when they get around to it. Now, in my firm, we only do social media. We don't build websites. We don't work on SEO. And no disrespect to anyone who does those areas. I don't claim to have the expertise in that. I understand SEO's principles and writing content for it to a degree, etc. But I don't get into the nitty gritty of like how to configure websites for optimization and all that. Having said that, what we focus on is lessening or removing the burden on organizations to run their social media. Now, some will have resources in place that are, deciding on the strategy and their content strategy and so on. But we're behind the scenes, we're their social media operations. We're making sure that we're giving their channels the consistency and frequency that is necessary. We will run paid social media campaigns. We'll curate third-party content. We're doing social media listening to see, how their share of voice is tracking, sentiment. Are there the conferences that they attended and related hashtags? Can we surface potential members of their community or people to follow, etc., or prospective customers? And so all of those things are happening. And so whether they have a marketing department in place and we're additional bench strength to support them, or they don't have any social media resources in place at all, then again we can be that extension to them, because building a website is a bit of a project. Once it's done, there's maybe some fine tuning and things like that afterward. SEO, once it's configured, again, some fine tuning after that. Social is always on. It's every day. And this is the challenge that organizations face. And if you tweet once every other week, there's no point in doing it because the algorithms are not working in your favor. You need to be consistent. And so our work, either creating content for them or with them, and the curation of third-party content to complement their own, all of those serve their overall social media objectives. And we're not here to tweet for tweet's sake. Our social media efforts are intended to drive traffic back to their website, to learn more, or to respond to some sort of call to action, some business outcome.
Excellent. And final question, what book are you reading at the moment?
Okay. I'm listening to an Audible book about content and PR, and I'm blanking on the title. It's by an Australian author who's a PR person, And I always find those sorts of books where he talks about like unusual content marketing. And one of the companies he mentions is Goulet pens. Now, I have a thing for office supplies and a good pen, but the fact that he's holding up a pen company as someone who's doing content marketing really well is pretty cool. So I've been checking them out. And another book that I've been working my way through is a book called Pull, and it's the history of networking, going as far back as like Benjamin Franklin and things like that. And so you talk about recommendations on LinkedIn. It's the idea of like letters of reference. They were like a LinkedIn recommendation that you carried in your pocket when you went from one city to another to say, I have here a letter of reference from so and so who says, to afford me all of the service and support that you can provide, and he's vouching for me. That's pretty cool. When you think it, like when you kind of make the analogy between a LinkedIn recommendation of today and a letter of reference then. So take it a step further. So I call this the super connector process.
Yeah.
And I put in my training too. So there's two ways to research on LinkedIn. I'm looking for, in your case, business owners, business of a certain size, this geographic location, if geography matters. So, if it's a 2 million and up, well, they're going to need, at least 20 people, whatever, like those, your persona better than most. So you're going to do broader research looking for people matching that persona. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a bit more, it's kind of more of a blanket approach. And then you're starting here and then you're drilling down. In addition to that, there's going through your clients, going through people that are already in your network that have a higher propensity to refer, are in the industry that you're targeting, or like are simply a fellow entrepreneur, and going into their specific connections and drilling down to say, Bob, Mary, I've been doing some research on LinkedIn. There's some folks in your network that I'd like to discuss with you first. Do you have 10 minutes for a call? And then I arrange a call with said Bob or Mary, and we do a Zoom call or whatever, and I share my screen and say, I'm not expecting a referral to these people. I just want you to quick thumbs up, thumbs down. Who amongst this group would take a call for me if you suggested that they do so?
Yeah.
And I will have found maybe 30 people in their network. Again, I'm not expecting 30, but in 10 minutes, they'll do a quick scan. I'm reminding them of who's in their network. And they'll go, oh, I didn't know Jane moved from company X to company Y. Well, she wouldn't have been a good fit for you at the old company, but she might be at the new one. And so do you know Jane well enough to say yes? Or would Jane, if I just reached out to her cold and said, Bob told me to get in touch, and I go through the list of 30, and if I come away with 6 names, and I do that once a week with a client or whatever, and on my own worst, I'm not doing it enough, but I have done it on a periodic basis, and get a handful of referrals and start some conversations. I can still do my search and find 100 prospects and just kind of plod my way through, and once a week or whatever, I can get 6 referrals from a client. And who's going to be a stronger prospect?
Definitely, and I think there's that, but also if it's a manufacturing company and their supply chain are hurting them right now, then there's every chance that if you figure out who's in the supply chain, you may be able to help them, coach them, and therefore they get a win because actually they're bringing the same lot of focus and discipline into that business that might help the client. So it's a reminder. I haven't done it for years. Haven't really had to think differently, but I think as we go into 2021 and we will have some clients follow, come to the end of their coaching program, or we're done with it, that we'll probably need to find another 3 or 4 really good clients as we go into next year without doing workshops or the traditional way. So yeah, that's just had me think in the last few weeks, let's go back to basics, getting good referrals, talking to people, just like who they know that just like them really benefit from, sort of that conversation. So yeah, it's something I'm just going to give some thought to next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, well, an example I give in my training is that it's not just about making a sale either. A few years ago, I wanted to join more boards. I'd done a program at my MBA school, post MBA, that was about training directors for corporations.
Yeah.
And not regardless of whether there was money involved or not, I wanted to do more board work to round out my career, and just my footprint, etc. And there's been a lot of peripheral benefits that have come from the roles that I've had on boards. Well, I went on LinkedIn. I was doing some research around the topic of innovation. I found a board that's at a local college focused on innovation, but I didn't know the head of the board. But someone I knew from my MBA program used to be on the board and knew someone on the board. And so I literally, a couple hops, Fariba introduced me to Carlos. Carlos was on the board. Carlos was an alumni of my MBA program, but I didn't know him, but he knew Fariba. So Fariba, after my request, introduced me to Carlos. And I had said, I want to talk to Carlos for this reason, so ultimately I can get an introduction to Robert. Fariba to Carlos, Carlos to Robert. Robert and I have a coffee. I end up on the board for 3 years.
Nice.
And it was just mapping through LinkedIn because I used to work in film and television. The only way you got a gig in film and television was by I call you up and say, do you know of a project that was crewing up where I can be of help? And you go, give this person a call. You call them. They go, fax me your resume. Well, now because of LinkedIn, I call you up and say, according to LinkedIn, you know so-and-so. Could you, if you're comfortable, refer me? And the fact that your network is now visible to me, if your settings are set in such a way, like that is so powerful. And I'm so much more productive with my networking because I can see who you know.
Andrew, many thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Really appreciate your words of wisdom. I'm sure a lot of people listening will take a lot away from that. Certainly the practical suggestions that you came out with. I think it's something we should all be paying attention to right now. It's certainly in the digital future, we need to be mastering this. So once again, many thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.